Well, think about interest rates, because the cost of money is time preferences, right? I'd rather have my money today than in a year or in 5 years or in 10 years. There's a cost of money. And that is going to be determined by all the individual time preferences in an economy. And we have to allow that rate to be discovered so that we can have an adequate interest rate to have a healthy balance between savings and borrowing. Because some people have to want to save their money. When you save your money, you're deferring your consumption. I'm not going to buy something today. I'm going to buy something tomorrow. But I'm going to get paid to wait. I'm going to get paid interest to defer my consumption. And the level of savings is what's supposed to determine the level of capital investment, because there's savings to support it. But all of that is turned on its head when you have basically a Politburo saying, no, we're going to set interest rates at 1%. And the way you know that the rate is too low is just looking at how low our savings are and looking at how much debt everybody has. When you have low interest rates, everybody wants to borrow because it's cheap to borrow. When you have low interest rates, nobody wants to save because you're hardly getting anything for savings. So we're punishing savings, so we have less savings. We're encouraging debt, so we have more debt. The government needs to be neutral. The government should not be putting its thumb on the scale. And the way you do that is the government just steps back. The Federal Reserve can say, look, we're not going to set interest rates. We're going to let the market figure out what the right interest rate is. I mean, that's how interest rates got to 20% under Paul Volcker. It's not like Paul Volcker said, what's the rate we need? I'll go with 20. He just kind of stepped back and took his thumb off the scale, and that's where rates went. Now, they didn't stay there that long. They gradually came down, but it was the market that brought them down. It wasn't Volcker. But that's what we need. The Federal Reserve needs to say, look, we're not buying bonds anymore. We're out of that business, and we're just going to see where rates go. And we're going to shrink our balance sheet, and here's what we're doing, because they got to do that, and just let rates go up. Problem is, rates are going to go way up, which they need to. They need to go way up. That's the solution to the problem. But of course, that creates another problem. It's like if you are a heroin addict, what is the solution to your heroin problem? Stop doing heroin. But when you do that, you're going to go through withdrawal because you're not going to have that heroin high anymore. But okay, yeah, it's going to be tough. You got to go through that, go into rehab, and then when you come out, you're in better shape. Well, if the Fed lets interest rates go up, we're going into economic and monetary rehab. It ain't going to be fun, but when we come out, we'll have a sound economy. But instead, every time the economy looks like it's getting ready to go into rehab, the Fed gives it more drugs, so it doesn't have to go. But that's the problem. We never correct the problems. We just keep making the problems worse, which means our ultimate stay in rehab is that much longer and that much, more painful, because by the time we get there, we're so screwed up because we've gotten so much drugs in the system that it's very difficult to get off. Every time the Fed kicks the can down the road, the cost of doing the right thing goes up. Because we keep doing this, yes, now it's going to be even more painful. But the argument that, well, we can't do it now because it's so painful just means that when you do it, it's even more painful. But what happens if we never do it, right? So, well, it's so painful, we're just never going to do it. Well, then you die of an overdose, right? Okay, and so what would be the equivalent of a monetary overdose? That's hyperinflation. And under a hyperinflation scenario, we just destroy the value of our money. And that's the worst way for this to end. But that's how it's going to end unless we do the right thing. But again, it's going to be a lot more painful to do that now than it would have been had we done the right thing in the past. The longer we wait to do the right thing, the more painful it is, which means the more reluctant people are to do it. Oh my God, we can't possibly allow that to happen. Well, yeah, that's what they said 10 years ago. We should have, because it would be over by now. But again, these guys have short time horizons. It's the next election. They don't give a damn about the country. That's the problem. The people running the country couldn't care less about the country. They just care about their political career. We can't pay back the debt. The problem is going to be, can we service it? Paying it back is impossible. But the only reason we were able to pay the interest on the debt was because the interest was practically zero, so that we could afford. We can't afford 5%. If the Fed keeps rates at 5% long enough for the entire national debt to roll over, which it will over the next few years, and let's say the national debt goes to 40 trillion and interest goes to 5%, that's $2 trillion a year just to pay interest on the national debt. I mean, where is the government going to get that money? That's like half of all the taxes the government collects. And that's at 5% interest. If interest rates go to 10%, interest payments on the debt will consume 100% of what the government collects in taxes or something like that, which, obviously we're beyond the point of no return. So the only way the Fed can keep paying the interest on the debt is if rates go back down, because if they stay up, it's impossible. We're going to get to $1 trillion a year, probably this year. It's going to be the biggest line item in the budget, other than maybe Social Security, Medicare. We're going to probably pay more in interest than we're paying for national defense. We're certainly going to be paying more for interest than education or welfare combined, or a lot of these other things. But eventually, interest is going to be the only thing we're spending money on. The U.S. government is simply going to be a conduit from collecting taxes and paying interest, right? There's not going to be anything left for it to do. So obviously, it's going to have to collapse before it gets to that point. And the most likely way it's going to collapse is inflation. Because if inflation is bad enough, let's say there's so much inflation that prices go up 10 times. Everything is 10 times as expensive. Let's say at the end of this decade, something that costs $100 now costs $1,000. Let's say that's what happened. If the national debt is, let's say, 40 trillion or 50 trillion, it will feel like it's only 5 trillion, because in relative terms. So that's how you wipe out most of your debt. You can't repay the debt, that's impossible. So you just repudiate it through inflation. You just screw your creditors by paying them back in money that has a lot less value. There's the honest way to default, which is we can't pay you back, so we're not going to do it. We're going to give you some kind of haircut. So if you own U.S. Treasuries, we'll give you 50 cents on the dollar or 40 cents on the dollar or something like that. But no politician wants to be honest and admit that we're broke. So instead, they just print a bunch of money and say, hey, everybody gets paid back. Here's all the money you loaned us. Yes, when you loaned us this money, you could have bought a car with it. And when we're paying you back, you can only afford a pack of chewing gum with the same amount of money, but we paid you back, right? We didn't default. Here's your money. But the key is what the money will buy. Having money that buys nothing is like having no money. If you want to know the right solution to the problem right now, is we let interest rates go way up, let a bunch of companies go bankrupt, let a bunch of businesses fail, free up the capital and their labor to be reallocated. But what the government needs to do is fess up in that environment and say, you know what, we have way too much debt, we can't pay it back. So we're just going to have to give everybody a haircut. And it won't be that bad. Let's say I own U.S. Treasuries, and I used to have $1 million worth of Treasuries, but now I have $500,000 worth of Treasuries. I still could be better off than people that own stocks or real estate. When I go to buy stocks and real estate, I might be able to buy more stocks and real estate because those prices will actually go down more than my bonds. And the cost of living might go down. So I have less money, but I need less money. Right? So it's not as big a disaster for the bondholders to get back 50 cents on the dollar, whatever it is. But also the government has to be honest with other creditors, like people who are expecting Social Security, Medicare, government pensions. The government has to say, we don't have any money to make these payments, so we're going to have to means test it, or these are the people that we're going to reduce your Social Security benefits. You're not going to get what we promised. So there's got to be a reduction in the size of government across the board. Everybody's got to be told the truth that they're going to get less. But since that's not going to happen, it's going to end up being much worse for our creditors. It's going to be much worse for the people on Social Security. They're not going to get their benefits cut. They're going to get paid benefits that buy nothing. The real reduction in their benefits is going to be even greater. So instead of, let's say, losing half your benefits are going to lose 90% of their value, and that's worse. But going forward, after we do this, we got to get rid of Social Security. We got to eliminate it so that future generations aren't dependent on an intergenerational government-run Ponzi scheme. We have to allow the free market to work. If we want real prosperity, then we need a real free market. And we can't have a free market with the government micromanaging everything and distorting all the markets with subsidies and taxes and regulations that make the economy a lot less productive than it otherwise would be. And it forces everybody to accept a much lower standard of living than what they would enjoy if we didn't have all this government.